true horror stories that will give you nightmares. Number 1. Mommy.
Do you like to be scared? These horror stories are so scary, they'll give you nightmares for weeks. If you're brave enough to keep watching until the end, I'm going to share some of the scariest horror stories I've ever heard. These are all true stories, and they're so creepy that they'll make your skin crawl. So if you're brave enough, step into my world of terror and let me scare you senseless.
In the beginning of my career as a nurse, I really enjoyed helping young children. As time went by, I became increasingly bothered and troubled with the sadder cases, and more than occasional deaths. After a particularly sad case, I reached a breaking point and wondered if I could keep working. My boss told me to take a 2-week break before deciding whether or not to resign, as she could see that I was already burned out. I booked a cabin in the middle of the woods, and my friend Rachel came along for a fun, relaxing 2-week vacation. Just the girls. It didn't take long for us to settle in, cooking dinner over the open fire and drinking delicious margaritas. On the 4th day, I woke up around 3:30 in the morning and decided to have a cup of coffee out on the back deck. Watching the sun rise over the mountains helped lift my spirits, so I ventured into the forest for a short walk. What was that? I froze when I heard giggling coming from the trees. The laughter sounded like several young children, and for a brief moment I wondered if I'd stumbled on someone's land. I called out, "Hello, who's there?" but no one answered. I continued walking, and for a while, the woods stayed very silent. Soon, I began to sense a presence, which then became more than one, as the giggling started up again, along with many footsteps. I spun around quickly and moved off the path, racing through the trees, trying to find out who was following me. The laughter was spirited and obviously coming from children running through the forest, playing hide and seek. For a brief moment, I got caught up in the fun of it, calling out to the children and laughing along with them as I ran aimlessly. When I broke through to a clearing, I was surprised to find that I was on my own, never once seeing any of them. Wow, they're really good at this game, I thought to myself. I stepped into the grassy meadow and looked up to feel the warm rays of morning sunshine on my face, until I heard the chuckles. This time, the laughter was more menacing, and I froze as I realized that I might be in danger. I retraced my steps and went back into the forest, doing my best to find my way as the laughter followed me along the path. Then, I stopped in my tracks. Several small hands wrapped themselves around the trunk of a tree, right in front of me. I took a few steps back, and saw a number of the other trees being hugged by small hands, but I couldn't see the children. The giggling reached fever pitch as something was thrown directly at my head, making me duck and scream in terror. When I looked down, I saw that it was a pine cone. I quickly stood up and started to sprint away from the hands on the trees. No matter how much I dodged, the pine cones continued to be thrown at me, while the crazy, evil laughter continued. Every time I turned around to try and see the children, all I saw were pine cones flying at me and hands around the trees. I finally reached the main path and ran for all I was worth on my way back to our cabin, not stopping until I saw it. Out of breath and really freaking out, I turned around at the edge of the forest and heard many tiny voices whispering. Rachel came out and asked what I was doing, and why I was out of breath. Trembling in fear, I pointed to the forest. I was just attacked by children. They threw pine cones at me. Rachel laughed loudly and gave me a hug. No matter what I said, I couldn't convince her about the ghost children. After going over the event with Rachel several times, she continued to tell me that I'd imagined the whole thing. She reasoned that the stress from my job was what started the whole hallucination, but I didn't believe it. The next day, I managed to talk her into going into the forest with me, so she agreed and she brought a picnic lunch. It really annoyed me that she wasn't taking me seriously, and I was even more ticked off when the child ghosts didn't appear. We spent a few hours walking, and after we ate our lunch, we wandered back to the cabin in peace. I started to wonder if I had hallucinated the pinecone attack, so I set off the following day, making sure that I had my phone. As I slowly walked down the path, I felt the familiar sensation of being followed and soon heard the giggling start up again. I yelled out, "Show yourselves," and held my phone up to try and capture the voices, then took a few pictures. When I played the recording back, there was no evidence of the laughter and the pictures only showed the trees. I was shaking from fear, but decided to continue on. It wasn't long before the childish whispering and giggling started up again, all around me. By this stage, my temper was growing and I yelled again and again as I stomped through the forest wildly. Half expecting more pine cones, I picked up a branch and started whacking the trees in a terrible fury. I screamed, "Where are you? Where are you? Show yourselves! Show yourselves!" The chuckles and giggles grew louder as I raged and ran aimlessly. Then I skidded to a stop when I saw a ghostly child step out from behind one of the trees, wearing a tattered dress. She had the look of a neglected child, and I took pity until she began to laugh and point to the space behind me. I spun around and saw several hands wrapping around the trees, with small heads occasionally peeking out at me. They were transparent to the point of almost being invisible, as I could see the other trees and hands behind them. I was shocked to see even more children jumping out from behind the trees, laughing and pointing wildly in every direction. They were all under the age of 10 and dressed in rags, seemingly lost and forgotten as they continued taunting me. Screaming again, I shouted, "What do you want? What do you want?" I nearly fainted when a small boy with black eyes came over to me. The chill coming off him froze my flesh and he reached his hand out, saying, "We need a new mommy." At first, my heart sank as I knew that this would be impossible, unless I just happened to die right here and join the children. With that thought, I was propelled into action and turned around to run away, but the ghost children had other plans. While I ran through the forest, many little footsteps charged after me and tiny hands grabbed at my arms and legs. Screams of terror and cries replaced the laughter of the children as they followed close behind, matching my speed. Something deep down told me that this was a message about changing my career, as much as I love children. They followed me all the way to the end of the forest, and it took hours to shake off the feeling of their icy little hands. I talked Rachel into leaving immediately. I didn't want to give the ghostly children a chance to lay their chilling hands on me and drag me into their haunted world to be their mommy.
Number 2. Mystery Caller.
Around 1980, Dorothy Jane Scott, a single mother of a young boy, began receiving threatening calls at work. She didn't pay much attention to the calls until one night, when the menacing voice on the other end of the phone told her to look outside. As she looked, there was a solitary withered rose on the windshield of her car. With each call, the stalker would alternate between telling her he loved her and threatening to hurt her. Although Dorothy thought the voice sounded familiar, she couldn't figure out who it was. And she never got to find out. Dorothy noted that one of her coworkers felt sick during a staff meeting. She and another coworker drove the man to a nearby hospital. While her two coworkers waited, Dorothy strolled outside to the parking lot. After that, she was never seen again. Her coworker said that when she didn't come back after a few minutes, they went outside to find her. As soon as they left the building, they noticed her car racing off, and they thought that something had gone wrong with her son. Nobody ever saw or heard from Dorothy again, including her son. 5 years later, her burnt remains were found at a construction site. Even more questions were raised about the case when a pile of dog bones was found next to her body. Nobody has ever been convicted of the crime or arrested on suspicion. The caller has never been found.
Number 3. Best Friends.
Best friends Megan and Sarah shared a room in their college dorm. One night in mid-December, Sarah goes out to a house party with her boyfriend while Megan decides to keep studying for her upcoming final exams. When Sarah comes back to the room from the party, the lights are all turned off and the room is quiet. Sarah doesn't turn them on, as her friend is asleep. The next morning, Sarah asks Megan to discuss the upcoming exams. As Megan stays silent, Sarah hesitantly uncovers her face to wake her up. Terrified, she looks at Megan's face, now turned black and blue, and she falls to the floor in a state of shock. She sees that everything on Megan's desk is all messed up, with only a note posted on the wall. The note said, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights?" The killer was in the room when Sarah returned the night before.